Why is Ivan's argument in the Brothers Karamazov so powerful? In my opinion, the discussion Ivan has with his brother Alyosha in the Brothers Karamazov is the highlight of the entire novel, even more so than the famous Grand Inquisitor tale that is basically the chapter right after. I read many philosophical texts, everything from Plato to Baudrillard and many others, and additionally I've read many of the classics, but to me the Brother Karamazov stands out as the supreme work in everything I've ever read. It's my top work. And the Brothers Karamazov has also been said to be the best philosophical novel that's ever been written. And within this novel, this dialogue, in my opinion, between Ivan and his brother Alyosha stands supreme above all other texts and dialogues. Why I found this part of the text so riveting and moving is that Dostoevsky, through Ivan, presents, in my opinion, the most powerful argument criticizing God and religion put forth in any text. The kernel of Ivan's argument really rests on this problem of human evil and suffering. Ivan explores this to its limit point, and he takes the suffering of children to be the point of his argument. Because in his opinion, if this holds, then the rest of his argument applies to all of humanity as well. I quote here, "I was going to speak of the suffering of mankind in general, but let us rather concentrate on the suffering of children." And then additionally, Ivan also says, "And for another thing, I refrain from talking about grown-ups because, in addition to the fact that they are loathsome and do not deserve love, they also have a requital for that they have eaten of the apple and have grown aware of good and evil and become as gods. They continue to eat it even to this day. But young children have not eaten of it at all, and are as yet guilty of nothing." Ivan makes the argument that in and of themselves, children are sinless. The only sin that they could carry is in the context of the sin of their fathers. At this point, Ivan begins to recount to Alyosha many accounts and cases of where children have suffered unjust violence and evil. The first instance and case that he looks at is the Turkish occupation of Bulgaria, and he recounts with gruesome detail the things that the soldiers and other men did to pregnant women and their infants. I can't recount them here in detail because of YouTube. I don't think it would be too favorable, but I do advise you to go ahead and read this entire dialogue really in its detail to see kind of the gruesome detail that Ivan recounts for a lot of these cases. Because evil really in its detail shows I think its most potent and emotional color, and in the abstract it can kind of just be tossed aside. But in any case, I really do advise reading those forever. And then Ivan quotes a quote that I'll always remember, and I don't think I will forget. Ivan says, "Actually, people sometimes talk about man's bestial cruelty, but that is a terribly unjust and offensive thing to the beasts. A beast can never be as cruel as a human being, so artistically, so picturesquely cruel. The tiger simply gnaws and tears, and that is the only thing it knows. It would never enter in its head to nail people to fences by their ears and leave them like that all night, even were it able to do such a thing." And then additionally, Ivan has another quote here. "I think if the devil doesn't exist, and consequently man has created him, he has created him in his own image and likeness, just in the same way he created God in that case." The second account Ivan recounts is one in Switzerland, where a bastard son that gets adopted by a group of shepherds in the mountainous regions, basically they get him so that they can use the boy for leading the flock and things of that nature. And he recounts how the shepherds send this young boy out into the fields to help the animals graze, basically with no clothes, and they don't feed him or give him any other support, and they abuse him. And he recounts how the boy had to basically go and eat from the same slop that like the pigs would eat, what they would feed the animals. In this case also, the boy would eat his fill and then throw up, but even then, the shepherds would beat him because they would say he's stealing the food from the slop that the pigs are eating. So Ivan's really just giving us some more evil accounts of human being and specifically children suffering. Then he has another case where this one is more man's cruelty towards animals as well. He recounts of a case of a Russian peasant lashing a horse on the face when he's trying to pull a heavy carriage and a heavy cart. Of course, the animal can't pull the cart and ends up like jumping and like squirming and ends up eventually pulling the cart. It's worth also noting that in the notes from the underground, in Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov has the exact same dream that I just mentioned and that he talks about here, where basically there's a horse that's getting beat outside of a tavern and they're asking, the driver and all the other people are asking it to pull until it dies, basically. And then just another account of kind of human cruelty is Nietzsche. Apparently, the story goes, in Turin, Italy, the onset of his insanity was caused primarily by him witnessing a horse getting beat and lashed by its owner, causing him to despair and like go cry and hug the horse. And that was like the next case Ivan recounts here is of progressively educated parents that are in good social standing, and he adds this detail specifically to kind of show that irrespective of like social standing and position, human cruelty and evil exists within all human beings, not any specific category. And in this case, he recounts how these parents of a young girl basically abuse her physically, and the story, they put her outside in the freezing cold in what's essentially like a bathroom, and she's like crying and pounding and asking for them to like help her and save her. She's crying out to God. And Ivan basically says how the parents sleep like a soundless sleep with no issues. And I quote Ivan here: "In every human being, of course, there lurks a beast of anger, a beast of voluptuous excitement derived from the cries of the tortured victim, a beast uncontrollable, unleashed from the chain." So Ivan's really recounting and showing here how this really exists within all human beings, this capacity for evil and sadistic violence. The final empirical point that Ivan discusses with Alyosha to kind of hammer down his point is the case of a wealthy Russian general who has a lot of like hunting dogs, and like he likes to go hunting in the woods. Apparently one of the peasant children, boys that lived in the area, hurt one of his hunting dogs, and he was so upset by this he basically locked the boy up, and then the next day in front of his mother released him out naked to be hunted down by the hunting dogs. And I quote Ivan here: "He hunted him down in front of his mother, and the dogs tore the child to little shreds. I think the general was put in a ward. But what should one have done with him? Shot him? Shot him in order to satisfy one's moral feeling? Tell me, Alyosha, my lad." And Alyosha says, "Shot him," Alyosha said quietly, raising his eyes to his brother with a kind of pale, distorted smile. So we can already see the strength and emotive power of Ivan's argument starting to bear its brunt on Alyosha. Even Alyosha is starting to be convinced here and to see that Ivan does have a logical point, that this aspect of human existence is empirically true, irrespective of how Alyosha feels about it. So we can see that both of the brothers at this point in the discussion are in a state of rapturous excitement. I remember personally feeling this way while I was reading this discussion in the novel, so I totally understand it. We can really start to see the weight and severity and power of Ivan's argument starting to dawn on Alyosha as he's starting to agree with many of the things Ivan is saying. After all these examples, Ivan says that his Euclidean mind struggles to comprehend and make sense of these empirical facts of suffering. He says we know that which we know, and Alyosha ends up asking him, "What do you know?" And Ivan replies with the famous Plato answer, basically, that he doesn't really understand anything. What he's referring to specifically is that he sees this empirical state of human suffering in reality, and any attempt that he has with his Euclidean mind to try and understand and comprehend this fails him and doesn't help him understand what is going on in this case of human suffering. I quote Ivan here, "Listen to me. I took this exclusive instance of young children in order to make it more obvious. Of the other human tears in which the earth is steeped from crust to core, I have not said a word. I have purposely kept my subject narrow. I am a bedbug, and I confess, with all due self-disparagement, that I am quite unable to understand why everything is ordered thus. So it must be the fault of people themselves. Given paradise, they wanted freedom, and stole fire from heaven, knowing that with while they would be unhappy, and so there would be no reason to feel sorry for them." This is an important myth he's referring to. He's basically referring to unity, paradise, pre-Lapsarian human fall, where human beings had no knowledge of good and evil. They had no knowledge. And he's kind of using this myth of the fire that Prometheus stole from the gods as a symbol of human knowledge, in this case of knowledge of good and evil as well. He's kind of mixing these two myths. But he's basically saying, but given freedom, this comes at a high price, and with human freedom and the fall on earth, you get both the highs and the lows. That's kind of the price of freedom, whether it's for humanity in general or from an ideological point of view when discussing freedom. For Ivan, this religious program that some should suffer, in this case children, so that all of humanity can be saved is detestable. And he really rejects all of this entire argument and its entire utilitarian program where the suffering of few is used as the salvation for the entirety of humanity. I quote him here, "Look, if anyone must suffer in order with their suffering to purchase eternal harmony, what do young children have to do with it? Tell me, please." And so really we reach the apotheosis of his argument. Ivan says, "And so I decline the offer of eternal harmony altogether. It is not worth one single small tear of even one tortured little child that beats its breast with its little fist and prayed in its foul-smelling dog-hole with its unredeemed tears addressed to dear Father God. It is not worth it because its tears have remained unredeemed." He's basically questioning, what can this perceived infinite harmony and salvation do for the poor children who suffered? How can their suffering be made right? This promised religious salvation by God achieves none of these things. The program is flawed even in its conception. And Ivan says to Alyosha that it's not God that he rejects or he doesn't believe in. It's the world, the empirical world of human suffering, and the program of religious salvation that he detests and he does not believe in. Finally, Ivan questions even Alyosha himself and asks him if he would be willing to pay such a steep price for the entirety of human salvation. I quote Ivan here, "Imagine that you yourself are erecting the edifice of human fortune with the goal of, at the finale, making people happy, of at least giving them peace and quiet, but that in order to do it, it would be necessary and unavoidable to torture to death only one tiny little creature, that same little child that beat its breast with its little fist, and on its unavenged tears to be found that edifice. Would you agree to be the architect on those conditions? Tell me this truly." Alyosha replies, "No, I would not agree," Alyosha says quietly. Ivan continues, "And are you able to allow the idea that people for whom you are constructing the edifice would themselves agree to accept their happiness being bought by the unwarranted blood of a small tortured child, and having accepted it, remain happy forever?" And Ivan replies, "No, I cannot, brother," Alyosha said suddenly with his eyes flashing. As we can see, even Alyosha, the devout believer, cannot accept such conditions. Ivan's argument stands as a powerful critique of God and the religious program of salvation. Permit and accept the conjecture that God exists, Even so, how can such a world permit such horrendous evil at the limit? What divine plan beyond the Euclidean mind could have hoped to compensate for this? If that plan is salvation, what justice will that do for those poor souls that suffered? Is the sacrifice of those children worth it, and as the end result? Who is to say? And this is basically the argument that Ivan puts forth in its entirety, critiquing God and the religious plan of salvation. In my opinion, it's one of the strongest arguments because Ivan is saying a much more frightening thing. He's saying, fine, let God exist, permit God to exist. But he says, if God really did exist, what kind of God would it be that would allow such human suffering and sacrifices to occur just for the sake of this religious salvation? He's saying maybe it is beyond our understanding, but as our limited and finite human minds, I reject this whole program and plan that's been put in place. So Ivan is really saying a much stronger statement. He's accepting it and then just using his freedom and evaluative framework to say that he absolutely just rejects this entire program and plan. So in my opinion, this is probably one of the strongest arguments that's put out there in relation to that entire religious enterprise and when discussing God. Ivan's kind of conclusion is that in the light of human suffering and human evil, it doesn't really matter. And with that, we're at the end of the video. I hope you like this one. I've been meaning to do this one on the dialogue between Ivan and Alyosha for a while. It's one of my favorite dialogues out there and in my favorite work. So I've been planning this one to make this one for a while. I have many more of these videos coming up. So if you really like this one, please like, comment, and subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Thank you.